She let a single dad and his daughter stay for one night, unaware he was the new CEO of her company. Snow drifted gently through the gray afternoon as Julie Harper wandered the city streets, boots crunching on the thin layer of white. Her blonde hair, damp with snow, clung to her cheeks. She did not seem to notice. Her eyes were dull, unfocused. Her purse sagged from one shoulder, arms hanging loose at her sides. People bustled past her, laughing, talking, moving toward purpose. Julie moved toward nothing. She stopped beside a snow-dusted bench outside a closed cafe and slowly sat down. Her breath curled into the air. She stared at her gloved hands in her lap, lost in the weight of the day. That morning she still had a job. She had arrived 23 minutes late. Not because she overslept. She had been up since dawn giving her mother insulin, heating soup, waiting for the nurse who never came. She rushed out the door with a guilty heart and trembling hands. Mr. Thomason had been waiting. "Julie, we need reliability. This is the third time. I had to care for my mom. She collapsed. I'm sorry," he'd said, though he clearly wasn't. "But this is a business." And that was it. Now she sat, adrift in the cold. "I'm trying," she whispered to no one. "I'm trying so hard." Then, something shifted in the corner of her vision. On the far side of the bench, huddled under the cafe's awning, sat a man and a little girl. He had wrapped his coat over both of them, shielding the child, but it was thin, useless against this kind of cold. The girl, 4, maybe, curled into his side, pink-cheeked and still. Her dark curls stuck to her face. She looked up, and for a heartbeat their eyes met. Julie's chest tightened. They had no bags, no stroller, no sign of waiting for a ride. They were simply surviving. Julie looked away, heart pounding. "You don't know them. What if they're dangerous? You just lost your job. You have nothing to give." But then, like a whisper, her mother's voice came to her. "If you can still help someone when you have nothing left, then that's when it means the most." She stood before she could think too long, her breath hitching. Snow crackled beneath her boots as she approached. The man looked up. His eyes were tired but kind, wary but not threatening. "Hi," Julie said, her voice low. I have a small apartment nearby. It's warm. I made soup earlier. If you need a place tonight?" The man blinked, then looked at his daughter. He said nothing for a moment, then softly, "Are you sure?" Julie nodded. "Yes." He let out a long breath. "Thank you, truly. We're grateful." Julie crouched to meet the child's gaze. "Hi there, I'm Julie. What's your name?" The girl pressed into her father's coat, then whispered, "Diane." Julie smiled. "Hi, Diane. Let's get you warm, okay?" The man stood, gently fixing Diane's coat. "I'm Matt," he said. "We won't stay long, just a night." Julie nodded again, leading them through the snow toward her apartment. Her chest still ached, but somewhere beneath the weight something warm flickered. Hope. Julie's apartment was small but warm, filled with the comforting scent of garlic and thyme from the soup she had made that morning, back when she still had hope for the day. The walls were lined with books and photos of her and her mother, a quiet testament to the life they had built together. Matt helped Diane out of her damp coat and shoes. Her socks were mismatched and worn thin. Julie noticed and offered a dry pair from her drawer. "Thank you," Matt said softly as he stood. Julie nodded and motioned to the couch. "You can rest here. I'll warm the soup." While she moved through the kitchen, Matt glanced around the space, clean, modest, clearly cared for. Noticing a loose cabinet door, he crouched and gently adjusted the hinge until it stopped squeaking. Julie looked over. "You didn't have to." Matt gave a faint smile. "Old habit. Fixing things keeps my hands busy." She raised an eyebrow, but let it go. Diane, now wearing one of Julie's oversized sweaters, tiptoed to the kitchen. "Philip, Wait," she said, her voice both careful. "It smells like a restaurant," the little girl said shyly. Julie smiled. "It's just vegetable and barley, but thank you." Diane giggled and returned to the couch. Julie set 3 bowls at her small table and poured the soup, adding a slice of bread to each. They sat down. Diane ate quietly, watching the adults with big, curious eyes. Matt took a spoonful, nodding. "This is good." "Cooking's cheaper than therapy," Julie said with a small smile. Matt chuckled under his breath. After a pause, Julie asked, "So, what do you do for work?" Matt stirred his soup, avoiding her gaze. "Took time off, figuring things out." She didn't press. She knew that weight in a voice. "I was going to Columbia," she offered. "Full ride for journalism. Then Mom got sick. I stayed, worked the front desk." Matt looked at her with something almost like admiration. "That's not nothing. You chose someone over yourself." Julie blinked. It had been a while since kindness didn't come with pity. "What about you?" she asked. "I lost someone. After that, I wasn't sure who I was." Julie nodded. "Yeah, I get that." After dinner, Diane asked to draw. Julie handed her a box of craft supplies from a closet. The girl settled on the rug, humming softly. Matt stood to gather dishes. Julie tried to stop him, but he insisted. While washing, he quietly fixed the loose faucet and adjusted a drawer that stuck. "You always fix things?" Julie asked. Matt gave a dry smile. "Only when I can't fix the big stuff." Julie laughed for the first time that day. It startled her, but it felt good, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Later, she returned to the living room and found Diane cradling something small in her hands. "I made this," she said, holding it out. "A bracelet, made from thin green wire and 2 plastic beads, uneven but carefully shaped." Julie knelt down. "For me?" Diane nodded. "You're the first person who smiled at me today." Julie's chest tightened. She pulled the girl into a hug, holding her close as tears slid silently down her face. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, needed, not because she could fix something, but because she had simply been kind. Matt watched from the couch. When their eyes met, he gave her a smile, small but honest. That night, after Diane fell asleep under a borrowed quilt, Julie sat quietly, turning the bracelet over in her hands before slipping it onto her wrist. It was crooked, awkward, and perfect. The ugliest jewelry she'd ever seen, and the most beautiful gift she'd ever received. The apartment was unusually quiet the next morning. No soft humming, no tiny footsteps padding across the worn wooden floor. Julie stirred in bed, the sun already spilling pale light through the thin curtains. She stretched slowly, blinking the sleep from her eyes, expecting to hear the soft rustle of a child waking or the low voice of Matt offering thanks again, but there was only silence. She sat up abruptly and looked toward the living room. The blankets on the couch were neatly folded. The little sweater Diane had worn now hung on the back of the chair, freshly laundered and smelling faintly of lavender. Her chest tightened. Julie rose and stepped carefully into the kitchen. The pot from the soup had been washed and dried, the sink spotless. The room had the eerie tidiness of a space just cleaned before departure. And then she saw it. On the small round table near the window, there was a white handkerchief, folded with precision, crisp corners aligned like something from another era. Resting atop it was a piece of paper, folded in half. Julie's fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up. The handwriting was strong, elegant, and unmistakably male. "Thanks, E." That was it. No full name, no explanation, no phone number, just a quiet thank you from a man who had taken nothing except a night's shelter and left behind something far heavier, his silence. She pressed the paper to her chest for a moment, then unfolded the handkerchief. Inside it was a drawing. Crayons. Bold, childish strokes. A woman with long, yellow hair, smiling, holding something green and round in her hand. The bracelet. Julie recognized herself instantly. Diane had drawn her, standing under a sky full of stars, the lines uneven but joyful. And on either side of her stood a taller man and a tiny girl, all three holding hands. Julie sank into the chair slowly, unable to stop the tears. It had only been one night, a few bowls of soup, a couch to sleep on, but it had mattered. It had mattered enough for Diane to leave her this. She wiped her eyes, then glanced up at the refrigerator. After a second's hesitation, she stood and retrieved the wire bracelet from the coffee table where she had left it before bed. The green wire caught the morning light like stained glass. Without overthinking it, she pinned the bracelet next to the drawing on the fridge door, securing them both with a single magnet. She stepped back and looked at it, the strange, clumsy wire circle, and the joyful image of herself as someone warm, someone needed. It looked like hope. It looked like something she had forgotten she could be. Julie did not know where Matt and Diane had gone. She did not know why they left so early, or where they would sleep tonight. But she knew this: they had seen her, not as the woman who got fired, not as the daughter always scrambling to care for someone else. They had seen her as someone who mattered, someone who helped. And now her small kitchen, with its chipped tile and second-hand chairs, felt like the site of something sacred. She sat back down at the table and wrapped her hands around a mug of coffee she had not even realized she poured. The seat across from her was empty, but in the quiet of that morning, it did not feel like loss. It felt like the beginning of something she could not name yet, but she knew it was real. The days that followed blurred into a grim routine of rejection and exhaustion. Julie pounded the pavement with a freshly printed resume, stopping at cafes, retail shops, and offices, anywhere with a "now hiring" sign. But no one was hiring someone like her, a college dropout, a former receptionist with spotty availability, a woman who looked just a little too tired, a little too fragile. At one office downtown, a woman in heels scanned her application for less than 5 seconds before looking up. "Honestly," she said, without a trace of empathy, "you seem too soft for this environment. We need someone tougher." Too soft. The words clung to her like a stain she could not scrub off. Julie left the building in silence, her chest tight, shame burning behind her eyes. She tried to focus on the sidewalk, not on the pounding headache building behind her temples, or the flutter of anxiety rising in her chest like smoke. That evening, as the sun began to set behind the gray skyline, Julie's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and saw the hospital's number. Her stomach dropped. When she arrived, breathless and red-faced from running the 12 blocks she could not afford to taxi, the nurse met her with a clipboard and a look of practiced concern. "Your mother experienced a minor heart attack," the nurse explained. "She's stable now, but she'll need medication adjustments and extended observation." Julie nodded, barely hearing the rest. The words "heart attack" echoed like a drumbeat in her mind, and behind that echo was a question she had no answer for. How will I pay for any of this? The ride back home was silent. She walked the entire way, arms wrapped around herself against the biting wind, ignoring the dull ache in her calves and the sharp sting of tears she refused to let fall on the sidewalk. When she finally reached the apartment and shut the door behind her, the silence inside seemed louder than the city outside. It wrapped around her like a fog. She dropped her purse to the floor and moved toward the kitchen, numb. Her eyes landed on the refrigerator, where the childish drawing still hung, crooked under the magnet. Next to it, the bracelet, that absurd little thing. Julie stared at it. The loop of wire, misshapen, bright green, the plastic beads unevenly spaced, the kind of thing most adults would throw away after smiling politely. She raised her hand, fingers curling around the magnet. Her hand shook. She wanted to rip it down, to throw it in the trash, to erase the memory of that brief moment of hope, because it hurt more than anything to think maybe, just maybe, someone had seen value in her, and yet here she was, more broken than ever. Her hand hovered there, the magnet loosening slightly. Then her eyes drifted to the crayon drawing, a woman with yellow hair, smiling under a sky full of stars, holding hands with a little girl. Diane's words came back like a whisper. "You're the first person who smiled at me today." Julie's hand dropped. She let the magnet fall back into place and sank to the floor, her back pressed against the lower cabinets, her knees pulled up to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them, and then finally she cried. Not polite tears, not silent frustration. This was sobbing, raw and heaving and unfiltered. Grief for everything she had lost, fear for what she might still lose, and somewhere inside it, buried like a stone at the bottom of a river, was shame for daring to hope, even for a moment, that she mattered. "I don't want to give up," she whispered between choked breaths, "but I'm so tired. I'm so tired." The light in the kitchen flickered gently above her, casting soft shadows against the wall. The bracelet remained, still pinned beside the drawing, untouched. It had survived the worst of her, and somehow, so had she. The call came on a Tuesday morning just after Julie had returned from her mother's latest appointment. She was peeling carrots in the kitchen, trying to make soup stretch for the rest of the week, when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something nudged her to answer. "Hello? Miss Julie Harper?" The voice on the other end was professional, clipped. "This is Sarah from Westbrook Corporation's Human Resources Department. Our CEO would like to schedule a meeting with you at your earliest convenience." Julie blinked. What? I'm sorry, I no longer work there." "Yes, we're aware," the woman replied gently. "Still, the request stands. He specifically asked for you by name." Julie's heart thudded. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, her voice small. "No," the woman said. "Just come in, please. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. When Julie hung up, she stood frozen for a moment in her kitchen. She looked at her reflection in the microwave door. Unwashed hair, dark circles under her eyes, an apron stained with broth. "Why would a CEO want to see me?" she whispered to no one. The next morning, she dressed in the cleanest outfit she had, black slacks and a blouse she had ironed the night before. Her nerves buzzed beneath her skin the whole subway ride there. She avoided her reflection in the elevator mirror, certain she looked out of place in the corporate building she once walked through every day. The receptionist greeted her with a polite smile and guided her to the executive floor. Julie stepped off the elevator and into a world she had never entered before. The carpet was plush, the walls lined with abstract art and glass awards. It smelled faintly of leather and fresh coffee. She smoothed her blouse, her stomach twisting. "What am I doing here?" A tall assistant opened a large door at the end of the hall and gestured her inside. "He's expecting you." Julie stepped in and stopped. Standing at the far end of the sleek, modern office, behind a wide desk of polished wood, was Matt. He was in a navy suit, perfectly tailored, his posture composed, hands loosely clasped in front of him. He looked every bit the powerful executive, but his eyes were the same, soft, kind, and unmistakably familiar. Julie's breath caught. "Matt?" she said, barely above a whisper. Before he could answer, a small voice shrieked joyfully, "Go, Julie!" Julie turned just in time to catch Diane barreling into her legs, wrapping her arms around her with pure, uninhibited delight. The little girl looked up at her with shining eyes. "Daddy said we might see you again." Julie dropped to her knees and hugged her tightly, blinking back stunned tears. "Hi, sweetheart. I didn't know you'd be here." Matt stepped forward, smiling. Neither did she. "I wanted it to be a surprise." Julie stood slowly, still holding Diane's hand. I don't understand." Matt nodded toward the couch by the window. "Sit with me, please." They moved to the seating area, and Julie sat stiffly on the edge of the cushion. Diane clambered beside her, resting her head against Julie's arm like she had never left. Matt sat across from them. "I owe you an explanation," he began. "And probably a lot more." Julie could only stare. "I bought Westbrook 2 weeks ago," he said. "I've been in talks for months, but the final deal closed recently. I'm the new CEO." Julie blinked, still stunned. "You're what?" Matt gave a half smile. "I took a break from the business world after my wife passed. That night you found us, Diane and I had just been turned away from our temporary housing. No heat, no plan. I was at my lowest. Julie swallowed hard, her eyes wide. You didn't know who I was. You just helped. No questions, no expectations. That kind of kindness? He looked down for a moment. It reminded me who I wanted to be. Julie felt her heart pounding. This man, this stranger, was not just a father she had helped one night. He was now the head of the company that had fired her. I wanted to thank you properly, Matt said, his voice quiet. But more than that, I was hoping to offer you something better. Julie stared at him, trying to process the pieces, the twist of fate that had brought them back together. He leaned forward slightly. Would you consider coming back? Not to your old job, to something more meaningful. Julie opened her mouth, but no words came. All she could do was look down at Diane, who was tracing little circles on her arm and smiling, like this was the most normal day in the world, and somehow, in that surreal, impossible moment, everything began to make sense. Julie sat quietly on the edge of the leather couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap, the weight of the moment still sinking in. Across from her, Matt looked less like a CEO now and more like the man she had met on that freezing night, tired but present, guarded yet sincere. He let out a slow breath and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. My wife's name was Caroline, he began, his voice steady but low. She was the center of our world, smart, hilarious, fiercely protective of Diane. She had this way of walking into a room and making everyone feel like they belonged. Julie nodded gently, sensing the depth of his grief, as much in what he did not say as what he did. She died in a car accident 8 months ago. It was sudden. There was nothing anyone could do. One moment we were planning Diane's 5th birthday party, and the next... He trailed off, his jaw tightening. Everything stopped. Julie felt her chest tighten. I'm so sorry, she said softly. Matt gave a small nod. After the funeral, I tried to go back to work, to lead, to pretend things could return to normal. But I couldn't. I'd walk into boardrooms and feel like a stranger in my own life. He sat back, glancing toward Diane, who was now quietly flipping through a picture book on the other end of the office. So I stepped away, he continued. Took Diane with me. We stayed in rentals, visited places Caroline had always wanted us to see. I wasn't running, exactly. I just didn't know who I was without her. Julie listened, heart aching, understanding more and more why he had seemed so fragile that night. That evening, we were supposed to check into a short-term apartment, he said. Something went wrong with the booking system, and by the time I realized we had nowhere to go, it was already snowing. I tried to find a motel nearby, but everything was full or too far. We ended up sitting outside that cafe, waiting, hoping I could figure something out before Diane froze. He looked Julie in the eyes now, unwavering. And then you appeared. Julie swallowed hard. You didn't know who I was. You didn't ask for anything. You just opened your door, fed us, made my daughter laugh, something I hadn't seen her do in weeks. That night changed everything. He leaned forward slightly. You reminded me that people still care, that decency isn't gone. You reminded me what kind of leader I want to be, and what kind of company I want to run. Julie shook her head slowly. I was just trying to help. And you did, he said. More than you know. He stood then, walked to his desk and pulled out a thin folder. Inside was a formal letter and a job offer. I bought Westbrook not just because it was a good investment, he said, but because I want to rebuild it into a place that values people, not just profit. And I want someone beside me who understands what that really means. Julie looked down at the offer, her stomach nodding. It was more money than she had ever made, a title she had never imagined for herself. I don't know if I'm qualified, she said quietly. I didn't finish college. I was a receptionist. Matt smiled gently. Julie, I don't need another person with a polished resume. I need someone with heart, someone who shows up, someone who opens doors for strangers in the snow. She blinked back a wave of emotion, unsure how to respond. After everything she had lost, everything she had questioned about herself, this offer felt surreal. "I saw your strength when you thought no one was watching," Matt said. "I believe in that version of you, and I hope you will too." Julie stared at the paper in her hands, then at the man who had once fixed her kitchen drawer without saying a word. Maybe, just maybe, this was not the end of something. Maybe this was where everything finally began. The promotion was unexpected, but not unwelcome. Julie had thrown herself into her new role as head of employee wellness and community outreach with the kind of devotion only someone who had lived hardship could offer. She created programs to help staff dealing with illness, childcare, and burnout. She listened to stories. She remembered names. But kindness, even when genuine, does not shield you from judgment. The whispers started in the break room. She was just a receptionist, right? I heard she didn't even finish college. Let's be real. Nobody gets promoted that fast unless they've got something going on with the boss. Julie pretended not to hear. She smiled through it, nodded politely, refilled her coffee. Until one afternoon, she walked past the copier and heard a man mutter, "I guess saving a CEO from the cold gets you more than a thank you these days." She made it to her office before the tears fell. Behind the closed door, Julie sank into her chair and covered her face with her hands. Her breath came in shallow bursts, and a storm of doubt rose like a tide inside her. They think I'm a fraud. They think I don't deserve this. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't. A soft knock on the door startled her. She wiped her cheeks quickly, trying to steady her voice. "Yes?" Matt opened the door slowly. His eyes fell on her tear-streaked face, and he didn't say anything. He just crossed the room, crouched beside her chair, and took her hand. "Come with me," he said gently. He did not ask questions. He did not lecture. That weekend they took Diane to the park. Julie pushed the little girl on the swings, laughing as Diane squealed with delight. Later, they flew a bright red kite together under the pale blue sky, and Diane insisted on drawing each of them in chalk on the sidewalk, Daddy, Julie, and me, holding hands. They bought ice cream from a vendor cart, and Julie sat on the bench as Matt handed her a cone. For a long time they sat there in silence, watching Diane chase pigeons and butterflies with equal enthusiasm. "She doesn't see the rumors," Matt said at last. "She only sees who you are to her." Julie looked down at her lap. "But the others do." "They see you," Matt said. "But they don't know your story." He paused. Maybe it's time they did. That Monday, Matt sent out a company-wide invitation. Town hall meeting, Thursday, 4 p.m., attendance encouraged. The entire staff gathered in the large auditorium. The air buzzed with curiosity, side glances, a few eye rolls. Matt stood at the podium, not in a suit, but in a soft sweater and slacks. He looked more like a man than a CEO. He began without a script. "Many of you know Julie Harper," he said, his voice calm. "Some of you have worked beside her, some under her leadership. But I want you to know who she was before that." He told them about the snowstorm, about a woman with tired eyes and gentle hands who opened her door to a man and a little girl with nowhere to go, who asked no questions, who expected nothing in return. "She did not know who I was," Matt said. "She only knew we were cold and scared and alone, and she gave us warmth, food, and dignity." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a wire bracelet, green and uneven, with 2 plastic beads hanging crookedly from one side. "This," he said, holding it up, "was a gift from my daughter to Julie that night. She called it her thank you bracelet." He looked at it for a long moment before carefully placing it on the table in front of him. "I've worn it every day since, because without this bracelet, I would not be here. Without Julie, this company would not be what it is becoming. She reminded me that leadership is not about power, it's about heart." Silence fell over the room like a blanket. No more whispers, just stillness, and then, slowly, applause. One pair of hands, then another, until the room echoed with it. Julie sat in the front row, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, not from pain this time, but from release. She had been seen, truly seen, and finally, she had been believed. The weeks after the town hall brought a quiet shift. The company felt warmer, more human. People stopped avoiding eye contact. They smiled at Julie, confided in her, trusted her, not because of her title, but because they sensed she understood. Her office door stayed open. She visited departments, asked the questions others missed. She launched community drives, child care assistance, support groups. Slowly, the walls between titles and people began to crumble. At home, life bloomed again. Her mother, once sick and silent, now laughed over card games and old movies. The wellness program covered her treatments. For the first time in years, Julie felt she was truly living, not just surviving. And then there was Diane. Weekends became their tradition. Julie, Matt, and Diane hiking golden trails, baking with too much flour, camping beneath stars. Diane insisted on adding sprinkles to everything, even scrambled eggs. One afternoon, Diane ran in, clutching a crayon drawing. "Look, it's us!" she beamed. 3 stick figures, one in a tie, one in a dress, and a child between them. "Dad, Mom, Julie, and me," it read. Julie's throat tightened. Later that evening, as they read by the fireplace, Diane leaned against her. "I asked God to send someone like you," she whispered. Julie blinked. "You did?" Diane nodded. "And I think he heard me." Julie glanced at Matt. Their eyes met. They said nothing, but everything was understood in the quiet. "At the companies, this woman changed my life and my daughter's on a night when we had nowhere else to go." Then, to everyone's surprise, he dropped to one knee. Gasps rippled. From his pocket he pulled a small box with a sapphire ring. "Julie Harper," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You were our light, our hope. Will you be our forever home?" Tears streamed down Julie's cheeks. Deanne ran onto the stage and wrapped her arms around her. "Is this our family now?" she asked. Julie knelt beside her, kissed her cheek, and turned to Matt. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes." Cheers erupted, confetti floated like snow. Their spring wedding was small, perfect, by a quiet lake under soft sun and swaying trees. No gold, no excess, just daisies, music, and love. Julie walked the aisle in a simple ivory dress, her mother holding her arm. On her wrist was no bouquet, but a crooked green bracelet made of wire and 2 beads. During the vows, Diane sat between them, holding both their hands. After the kiss, she grinned up at them. "We did it," she said. Later, as the sun sank toward the horizon, they walked hand in hand along the stone path beside the lake. Julie, Matt, and Diane, shadows trailing behind them. Julie looked back once, at the distant skyline, the tower where she'd lost her job. Once it had felt like the end. Now it was simply where everything had begun. Thank you for joining us on this heartwarming journey, a story that reminds us how one act of kindness can change the course of multiple lives. Julie opened her door on a snowy night, not knowing she was stepping into a new destiny, one built not by titles or wealth, but by compassion, courage, and love. If this story stirred something deep within you, made you believe a little more in humanity, or even brought a tear to your eye, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.